live here from COP29 Baku here, and very soon we'll be hearing the Minister of Environment from South Africa, who will be briefing all those media people here live, and he will also explain that how the negotiations are being progressed here on the very second last day that negotiations are very hard. But during this media briefing, he will also highlight that how the America's stand and India and China's stand are placed here, that how they are being a part of, are playing their role, especially in the terms like when the China and India are the biggest economy, and most of the things like which is revolving around those big economies across the world. And another most important thing, he will also emphasize that how he just stand as a minister, his position, that how the things are moving as a chief negotiator from the African continent. So let's hear his media briefing here from live from Baku at COP29 venue.
And of course we need the means to get there. Also, the issue of the cost of capital has come up because obviously mitigation and finance are intricately related. I'm not sure what's going to be happening in the NCQG, but we did have some feedback this morning, and there's various options on the table, but we haven't seen what that looks like. But certainly from the mitigation side, it's important that we tie the mitigation together with the finance. Now, it doesn't have to be a very tight connection, but there does need to be that. So we did find that there was one of the parties one of the groups of countries was a very far outlier in terms of the position that they took. Basically, their position from the outset was, look, this particular thing, would it be a deal breaker, and we're not prepared to move on it. My response to that is, well, we do have an existential crisis. Do we agree that? Yes, we do. And therefore, what is required is leadership and bravery. So we need to actually do that. So I think we made quite a bit of inroads on that. I do have a final text, or a draft final text with me that I've just read now. There is one particular area that I want in the agreement, and I am not at this point agreed with the co-chair in Norway. I'm going to be meeting with them shortly because there is a part that was discussed with all parties. I made sure that every single party had this on the table, and there was a bit of discussion on it, and I believe it should be in the text. It appears that their view is that it should not be in the text. I don't agree. So I will be meeting with my counterpart shortly so that we can have a discussion on it. I'm sure we'll be able to find a way forward on it, but it matters and it is very important. So that's where we currently are. I do think there's going to be an outcome. What it will actually look like, I'm not sure. There was also a view, which was an outlying view, is that there should be a clear 1.5 degree roadmap. That did not fly. But we will land somewhere in between. So I think that we've made significant progress from what happened previously, and I think the reason for that is because it was quite a robust discussion. I mean, it's that kind of thing. I said all along, what was happening before this COP29 was that there was a lot of discussion on COP30, and I said, well, we haven't had 29 yet, and it is possible to have an outcome. And there was quite a strong view that we weren't going to be able to find each other specifically on mitigation because it is apparently the most complicated. But of course, it's a good thing that maybe I didn't know that as much as I know now, but that actually gave me the opportunity to try new things. So in terms of walking on a new way on the same road, for example. So I feel we've actually made significant progress. It's just that sticky point now. I'll be meeting Norway as soon as we're done here because we're going to have a nice friendly conversation.
Just on the. I don't think he's going to say that on camera. Is he?
What am I going to say?
Which group was announced?
I won't share that at the moment. I may afterwards, but I think not now, because what I've done is I've met with another party who is close to that party, and I've made some suggestions. And so they're going to meet now. And I've said, look, this is South Africa's position on it, and also me as the co-chair. This is what I found in the meeting. I do think that you've got quite a lot in common and you're working on another thing in this other area. So if you can support me on this, then I can support you on this other thing. So they're going to be having a conversation, and I think that we'll be able to move. But I will explain it afterwards. I mean, obviously, I want to just get on with my strategy.
On the cost of capital, which is one of the issues you've raised really strongly at this COP, it does seem that, we don't know yet what the quantum is going to be in terms of the NCQG, but it does seem that most of that is going to be in concessional, let's say that the core funding is going to mostly be loans, which even if they are loans at concessional rates, those are nonetheless loans that poor countries must pay back. What's the attitude of the developing countries to that stance, which is that we'll put some money into the development banks and then you must leverage your private sector and get some more money?
The position of the developing economic countries like South Africa and the African bloc is that we do not have fiscal space for loans. And therefore, we need grant funds or very highly concessional funds. And that position has not changed, and that's the way that we want to go forward. Now, it is so, we had some discussions yesterday that some of the developed economy countries are actually, they've moved and they're quite keen to provide a significant amount of capital, but it's also related to expanding the contribution base. And that's where, that's where the abrasion has been already. So what we as South Africa have proposed is we've said, look, you can look at it as a component kind of a model. We've been speaking about an outcomes-based model for climate financing, which is a different way of looking at things. So what we are saying is that you can look at the NCQG as a basic component block, and then you can look at a second block, which would then be possibly a debt relief, or it could be concessional capital, etc. And then countries that have not been contributing to the basic block have in fact already been contributing to that second block because they've been offering concessional financing. So I think that conversation is still very much on. I don't think it's a zero-sum game, but I think the geopolitical element has now come into play quite to the fore. As we get closer to the end of the conference, I think those fault lines become much clearer. And I think that that's where we are currently at the moment. So we are now at that point where we're saying, well, okay, we've identified all those fault lines. Now, where's the agreement? Yes, it's about the quantity of the money, obviously, because if you're going to get to, for example, 1.5 degrees Celsius, then you need to have the finance commensurate with that. That's pretty logical, and that's what we discussed yesterday in the mitigation consultations. But on the finance piece, the feedback this morning was that they had made progress, that there were several options on the table. It's obviously also about how you crowd in the private sector. I had a meeting earlier on today about how you then look at, for example, the biodiversity and how you look at costing that. So in other words, investment in biodiversity, if the private sector does that, they maybe get some credit and therefore their consumers will buy more and therefore you can have a virtuous cycle. So those are things that we're looking at in terms of the how. So I think it's a little early to start pinning now where we are in fact on the finance, but it's definitely been a movement from the $100 billion. So there is definitely movement up from that. How big the movement is, I'm not sure because I'm not in that particular stream, but we will be meeting again today. The first texts were due at 2 o'clock. So as I mentioned, we've been working on the mitigation text. And then at 5 o'clock, there will be another discussion. Obviously, the presidency has quite a lot of power in this process. So what they will do is have a look at the whole thing. Yesterday, I actually asked the question. I said, look, I need to know more about how a mitigation hangs together with the other pieces, specifically with the finance, because it's very hard to actually place it. The United Kingdom and Brazil have been asked to hold things together on that. So I had a brief meeting this morning with Brazil just to get an indication because I needed to know, and I got some information on that. So I think that we are really moving in a good way. I think the reason for that is because this is a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, etc. And I think everybody feels quite animated about having an outcome that is forward. And I think that's the thing. So I do think that that's going to be possible. The question is how far forward it is. We know that this process is very difficult, and also we know that coming into COP, there were a lot of commentators who were saying, well, look, you're actually not going to get anywhere because the fault lines are there, there's going to be a standoff. There was a deadlock in the adaptation stream. Our position on that is, well, then let's focus on the loss and damage, because that is something we've all agreed on. Of course, now how do you get the money into it? And we can be innovative as well. So the role, as I said, of South Africa is a very important one because we're non-aligned, we speak to everybody, and we speak very openly. And what I committed from the beginning in my role in the co-chair is that I'm not coming here to smile and wave. I'm coming here to actually get some outcomes. And we've had some really difficult moments in our consultations, but I've been very straightforward. South Africa is a solid citizen in terms of where we want to go. We believe that there is an existential crisis here, and we have come here because we want an outcome. And if we need to look at each other and growl at one another, then we must do it, because it's the hard stuff. There's no point in smiling and waving and having something that's very nebulous, that's not going to get the world anywhere. So I'm very pleased to say that in our robust conversations, it's moved. And I think that that's maybe a slightly different approach to maybe what we have. As I remind everybody that I'm a politician and not a diplomat. And so therefore I might phrase it in a little bit more blunt of a way, but that's just fine. I didn't come here to make a whole lot of friends. I came here to get an outcome for South Africa, for our region, for our continent, and for the world. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Well, South Africa's already made its position very clear as a member of BASIC, is that we agree with China and India that they are developing economies and that they are not required, in terms of the Paris Agreement, to contribute on the basic block, as we said. It was the developed economy countries that agreed that they were going to be contributing. It was the 100 billion that they had initially agreed to contribute. We know the apparent confusion about whether it was paid or not paid. We know that it wasn't paid. But of course now we don't want to harp on the past, we want to focus on the future. As I said before, that there is a possibility of a new climate financing model, and it can be in components. So for example, if you look at the basic component block, we don't have to spend our whole time fighting about who should or shouldn't contribute. We can consider the NCQG, that basic block, as a component A. Then we can look at component B. So for example, it is true that China has already been contributing because it has been offering concessional loans. And perhaps that could be block B or component B. Now, of course, South Africa is not chairing the NCQG or the finance stream, so that is not something that we actually have a lot of control over. But certainly as a participant in the process, the South African technical view, the political view, and also the Africa view that we share is that that is what we think is possible. So we actually don't think it's very helpful for fault lines to be drawn like that, because what is happening is that it's quite easy and a little, I think, simplistic in my view to say, well, there's the developed economy view and there's a developing economy view, and then they're going to fight it out. Well, actually, that's the way you get nowhere. What we have to do is we have to look at what South Africa proposed. As we said, let's focus on the output. So if we say, well, where are we trying to go? We're trying to go to 1.5 degrees, okay? We want to restrain at 1.5 degrees if we can. So if we're going to go there, what will then it cost? It will cost a stack of money. We proposed $1.3 trillion per annum. That's the South African and African view. Perhaps we won't get there, but we will go forward from the 100 billion and then look at how you crowd in. So that will be the basic block. But we do need the lower cost of capital, and that's what I've been focusing on in the mitigation stream. I am going to get that into the stream. So far, so good. It seems like that nobody is disagreeing with that, but we'll see, because we might find some fault lines coming up there. But certainly talking about the cost of capital, which we've been discussing anyway, as the incoming president of the G20, we will take that forward. But we haven't finished the process yet. It still needs to be agreed. And remember, unlike in South Africa, where we use the concept of sufficient consensus, this is full consensus. Obviously, if South Africa had full consensus, we probably wouldn't have a government at the moment. But we have sufficient consensus. We say, well, okay, we're agreed enough to go forward, so let's move forward. And then we go from there. Here, obviously, in this particular environment, if one person doesn't agree, you don't have anything. And that's really hard, especially when you have those nations and groups that have chosen to take the initial position of this is a deal breaker with this thing and I'm not budging. It's not a good place to start. You don't start there. You start at saying, well, let's talk about what's on the table, and then when it emerges, you say, now I'm going to have a standoff and I'm going to stand firm. So there is a particular item on which I need to stand firm now, and I need to have a discussion on it with my co-chair, which we will have now. But the point is that that's also areas where you debate. So I think that this whole process is very useful. I think it's an opportunity for us to find one another, and we can do that. And as I said, from South Africa's position, is we've been crystal clear from the outset what it is that we want to achieve. We might not get everything, but I do think we're going to get quite a lot. And that is because we are crystal clear and focused in terms of what we want. We didn't come, as I said, to make a whole stack of friends. That's other people's jobs. Maybe that's the diplomats' jobs. But my job as a representative of South Africa in the chair is to get the best outcome on mitigation and to make sure that the South African and African position lands properly. But we're listening. We're not saying, oh, well, we're drawing a line in the sand and now we won't budge. That's not helpful either. Let's discuss it. We can find a way, like South Africa does, with all its other situations.
You're taking over the G20, as you said. Could you just talk a little bit more about what your priorities will be going forward over the next 5 years?
Well, we've set, as I mentioned before, the global financial architecture is an issue that we've been raising for a very long time. Now, of course, it's the first time that Africa and South Africa has been the president of the G20. So our focus is very much that it's an African G20. So it's a G20 with an African flavor. And what's very much on the mind of Africa and South Africa is the fact that the cost of capital is too high. And what is happening is that there is a flow of finances from the global south to the global north. And that is not working, and it's making the people of the south poorer and poorer and poorer. And it's not working for anyone. So that's the big piece that we will be discussing. So that is one of the top priorities. The other priorities also include the climate matter, obviously, which is ongoing. So we've committed ourselves to continue the good work that was started by Brazil and others. And also the very important thing about inclusivity. We want a world that is inclusive, and that means justice for everybody. So when we look at our just energy transition in South Africa, we're saying we don't want to leave any of our people behind. We will go through the transition as fast as we can, but at a pace that we can do it and not leave anybody behind. But we need to widen that circle. There's many difficulties in the world, and we believe we can be a force for good. As a non-aligned country, we can be very much a voice of reason, etc. As the geopolitical sands shift and as electorates go more to the right, etc., they become more insular. We don't think that that's a good thing to be doing. Rather, be broader, be more inclusive, etc. That's a world we want to have, where we really have a better future for everyone. So South Africa is quite clear in our presidency. It is for South Africa, it is for Africa, and we want to make sure we leave a good legacy. And that one of those good legacies is the cost of capital. Because if we can sort that out, you can lift poverty and you can look much more closely at the inequality that is a massive problem across the world.
Will COP29 make stronger the commitment of COP28 to transition away from fossil fuels?
I think the general consensus is that we need to move in the right direction. There is also a view, which is an outlying view, that there needs to be, there is going to be this very hard stance and we're going to phase out. I think that language is not going to be landing effectively. I think it needs to be softer than that. I think that there are different circumstances for different countries, and that's been made very clear. So I don't believe it is possible for everybody to move at the same pace. And I think that's the crucial argument. It's much easier for a nation that's much more developed and advanced to have a quicker and easier transition. For those that are on a different path at the moment, it would take longer. And I'm not sure whether we'd even get that articulation at this point. But what we will get is a movement forward. And I think that's an important thing. Also, there's the concept of, remember the nationally determined contributions. If there's a menu of contributions that can be made, there are various ways for nations to contribute towards this global initiative. So I think hard lines are not going to actually take it forward because it is an area of full consensus.
Minister, that's kind of worrying. Does it mean South Africa is stepping back on the commitment to phase out by 2050?
Not at all. South Africa's commitment remains exactly as it was. We are fully committed to the path we're on. I'm not talking specifically about South Africa. Here at COP, there are many nations who have different experiences, etc. And so they must be able to look at themselves and make the contributions that they can make in terms of the nationally determined contributions. And it is up to them to decide, because they're sovereign nations, as how they would want to do that. So that needs to be clear. From South Africa, we have the Climate Change Act. We've made it very clear that we want to transition. We know the complications of the transition because we are a developing economy country. We have a lot of poverty in our country, and we have committed to not leave anyone behind. So that is the path that South Africa's on. Nothing has changed. In fact, the reason why we occupy a very important position in the world and in this particular COP is because we are an example of a country that is committed to transitioning, that we are moving in the right direction despite the complexities that we have. And I think that that is something that is very much appreciated by other nations in the world. Together with our non-aligned stance, we are able to do things that maybe other nations aren't able to do. So no, our commitment has not changed, and we remain absolutely committed to get where we want to go as fast as we possibly can, but not leave anybody behind.
Donald Trump in the White House, there's an expectation that the dollar is going to be stronger and that global yields will be higher. You're talking about making lowering the cost of capital one of your priorities. How are you going to do that?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. I mean, Donald Trump is not yet in the presidency, but we've seen the markets responding as they have. The way that, South Africa in particular wants to view things is we want to see, what actually are the policies that are going to be chosen. Obviously, Mr. Trump has said that they will withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and I've had some discussions with the American delegation while I've been here. And so that have been very interesting conversations. But I think that we mustn't jump the gun. Yes, what America does matters enormously, but also we must bear in mind that countries choose, their voters choose the way that they want to go. So the American people have chosen a particular direction. As they withdraw from something, possibly, then a vacuum happens, and then maybe something fills that vacuum. We don't know what will happen. There's been this conversation about the de-dollarization of the world, etc. We don't know where that's going to go. But of course, America is going to have to decide what it wants to do. The consequences for it, we don't know. We're not America. But the key thing is we do not know what capital is actually going to do, because perhaps this is going to be the time when the shift happens, because things have changed. And when things change, South Africa knows that very well through experience, actual experience, is that when things change, there's enormous opportunity, and we must never waste an opportunity. So perhaps the choices that America has made presents an opportunity. We don't know, we will see, but we will certainly be alive to any possibilities that do arise. So it's going to be very interesting. I'm going to Davos in January with the Minister of Finance of South Africa, and we're going to have some very interesting conversations, but we are absolutely committed and crystal clear where we want to go. We need to do various things to ensure that capital is less expensive for developing economy countries, because there is no other way. And that is what we will focus on, and I believe we're going to make very good progress on that. So let's see how things unfold.
You mentioned that the money that's flowing to the global north is not working, obviously, for the global south. Are you referring to the JP project?
No, I'm referring, for example, let's take CBAM, for example, the proposed tax on our economy that we're very displeased about. We've been having some really constructive conversations with the European Union, because our position is very crystal clear on that, is that imposing a tax on South Africa's economy. We know what it's for, etc. The fact is the impact on our economy is not going to be positive and we don't like it. So we've said we must find a way where we can soften the blow on this tax. We need to look at some kind of circularity, etc. There's going to be some discussion on the various directives applicable to this tax, and that conversation has already started. So, because it doesn't make sense that it is much less expensive for developed economy countries to get capital. It is much more expensive for developing economies to pay for their capital. And what then happens is you have a flow of money from the south to the north. And if you impose a tax on us, you're doing that at an even faster rate. And that is not acceptable. Because if everybody's claiming to really want to do what they say they want to do, well, we want to alleviate the pressure of poverty and inequality in the world, that's not the way to do it. So we've made it very, very clear, and I will in fact be having another conversation with the European Union later on today, and I look forward to that with great anticipation, but we really are making good progress on it. So, as I said before, the South African position is clear. There is no confusion as to where we want to go, but the way that we walk, I think, is quite a light way, because we don't walk around crossing our arms and saying, here's red lines that we don't cross. We don't work that way. We say, fine, this is our position, let's talk about it, because maybe we can find a different way of walking along this particular path.
Today, South Africa also signed like 55 other countries, I believe, the resolution on making tourism more sustainable. Can you just tell us a little bit what you think the significance of that is and what tourism means for South Africa?
Tourism is obviously very important for our economy. Further than that, I do not know. I've been sitting in a meeting all day long on the mitigation, so I actually don't know the technical detail on it. But of course, my counterpart, Patricia de Lille, Minister Patricia de Lille, Minister of Tourism in South Africa, is spending a lot of time and effort to make sure we can attract more tourism. In fact, when we're done, there's a video you can watch on the screen that's to my right. That's Kruger, Kirstenbosch, Isimangaliso Icon Status Strategy, and it showcases the Kruger National Park, Isimangaliso, and Kirstenbosch. Those are our apex institutions for our wildlife, our botanical gardens, and our marine reserves. We have a beautiful and very diverse country, so please come and visit South Africa at your first available opportunity.
So this was Diane George from the South Africa. That he was just briefing that media briefing at the COP29. So, this is just live, and what are the conclusions, outcome comes? This will be shared very shortly live from Azerbaijan.